You know, I think it's really important that we see these kind of stories and the narratives that we bring. Thank you. So I'd like you guys to introduce yourselves, which film you're associated with, and then I'm going to ask one or two questions and then throw it out to the audience. So you can start with you.
Yes, good evening, everybody. My name is Sean Antoine II. I was the writer, director, producer, and editor of The Sight Unseen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sabria Jackson Brown, and I was the writer, producer, editor, and animator for Kindah, A History in the Shadows.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deb Farrar-Parker, and I am the producer, writer of The Final Letter.
Hi, I'm Taya Arboleda. I am the director and the editor for The Final Letter.
I'm Martine Grammy. I'm the director of Same Water.
We're going to pass, you only have 2 mics, so then you guys can send this one down. So what was your inspiration in bringing these stories to life, and why do you feel that film was the most effective way for you to be able to unearth these hidden stories?
I mean, film is my medium. It's the way I express myself. I honestly was making a larger film about my family and caretaking and mental health. And then before a member of my family passed, it just felt too hard to actually continue with that film. So I went back to the family archives and looked at footage that actually was joyous and made me happy. And I came across this trip with my grandparents on my maternal side, and called them up and was like, why did we detour? What was that all about? And they're like, I don't know, we got some kind of voucher or something, we just went big. It was just kind of a throwaway for them, but it really stuck with me. And then I started doing a little bit more research and reporting, found out about Paradise Park and this history. And then the film kind of became unto itself this document, for Paradise Park, because the only footage that actually exists besides people's personal archives is the footage you saw in the film. Whereas Silver Springs was well documented, pristine, preserved, and so that was kind of the impetus for the film, and a little bit of feeling as well.
I've been working with Deb for decades, and when she asked me to join her on this journey, I was very happy because the story resonates a lot with me in terms of my own background. And my mother was born in Germany in 1941, and my father being a black man who went to Europe to escape what was going on here in the United States. So when she asked me to join her on this journey, I felt it was the right thing to do. I've made a lot of documentaries in my life. I've worked for a number of different organizations to bring some of these stories to light. And that's the other thing that really resonated with me is the story that she wrote. So thank you, Deb. I just want to
growing up, my siblings and I, my sisters here, we knew that my uncle had been in a concentration camp, but he never talked about it much. And it wasn't until my niece and I found this treasure trove of letters in the basement. We were cleaning out the basement just before the turn of the century. And of course we stopped after we found the letters. It still needs to be cleaned out. But so we were inspired to tell his story. It's been years and years, but given the political environment today, it was like, if not now, then when? And it's a story that just needed to be told. I feel like I'm giving him voice again.
was most comfortable with. But I really challenged myself to do my senior thesis, which is what this film was for, in a medium that I have admired, but I had no formal training in. And I think parts of this would be really hard to tell exclusively in written interviews and as an article because it's in a beautiful country, Jamaica, my homeland, and it's about a very visual story of war and hidden secrets. Yeah. So I chose film because I just thought it would be the easiest way for people to learn and the most accessible and like rewatchable, so that people could, share this hidden story from my island, and so that maybe more people would be curious enough to learn more.
Yeah, so for the sight unseen, I guess the most appropriate way would say how I first heard about this story. My mother was in the audience. Raise your hand, Mom. She's the centerpiece of the family. She, for years, had never told me this story. Up until about 10 years ago, we were in Reedsville, North Carolina. My great aunt, my Aunt Sarah, who at one point was living in Massachusetts with her husband, my Uncle Leroy, who passed away at the end of the film. She actually told me this story for the first time down south. I had only known her as this old lady that lived down south in a small house by herself, but she never told me that she had a husband back in the 70s and what happened. And she ended up telling me this amazing story about a glowing cross. And 10 years later, while I was in graduate school at Northwestern in Chicago, working on my documentary thesis film, one of my classmates was like, you should do that story you told us about the glowing cross. And I went on this journey of interviewing family members throughout the country who were much older than I am, and invoking and diving deep into these memories, along with working with my mother, who's an amazing, she co-directed some scenes, wrote some stuff. As I was working on this, I guess I could probably speak for many Black Americans here. In the 70s, and I did see in Same Water, you guys were able to actually have some archival footage that I believe you said that your grandmother had spoken about buying a camera back then and actually filming. But for so many of us, we didn't have access to these resources, whether it be a camera, a video camera, a 16mm camera. But what I did have is I had people's actual oral histories and oral traditions. And I'm very grateful that my mother was there alongside with me in this project. And as I was learning about stuff, as my mother was regaining her memory, I was visualizing these things. So film became the only medium that was accessible, along with this amazing article that Melvin Tabley for the New York Amsterdam News wrote during that time. And I was just visualizing what this moment would have been like, using hybrid techniques like you guys did as well. And like bringing this to life, documentary is kind of in this influx zone right now where, it's not as marketable, but also, it's very important that we have these untold stories. So I had this crazy idea, like, what if it's a documentary, but it's narrative, but it's a film, and really trying to make it as seamless as possible, and really trying to let you guys have sort of this insight into my family, into the household, into the community that I love so much. So film, for me, felt like the best medium to tell the story.
It's interesting when you're sort of like working in your family history and things like death, like you finding those letters, it was something that happened in our family as well. We found a whole treasure trove of information about the Negro Theater. But then you're going through it and you're reading it and you're having these conversations maybe with your family members. So just briefly, can you talk about like what that stirred up? Because sometimes it's not easy, easy things to talk about. They don't want to talk about these things. So can you just sort of touch on how emotionally you sort of like dealt with that as you were making this film?
Yeah, for me, working on this project, I was wearing so many hats as the writer, let's start with as a researcher, then going into writing, and then directing, producing, and then finally editing, I really had to detach myself from being, a family member at times. I had to be the filmmaker, and I think for me the biggest part of this story wasn't a mother and son family film. It was more so about this 6-year-old girl that discovered this miraculous cross in her window and how that galvanized the community. And also on top of that, I really wanted to pay homage to this fellow Melvin Tapley, who did so much work in the community for many years, and at some point he actually wrote a story about my family. So yeah, it was tough. I think now, as I even watch this film, and even being in Massachusetts, knowing this is where my Uncle Leroy spent his last days, it's just now hitting me as like, this is my family. But during the project, I really had to detach from that because I'm leading a big crew, working with people, raising money, and being entrusted in telling the story first and foremost. And then now, as I reflect back, watch the film with so many people, they ask questions. Now I'm starting to realize, that was my grandmother I was able to honor. That was my grandfather, my uncle, my aunt, my cousins. And then now it's become a lot more of a reflective process as now I bask in the moment.
For me, I think this was an emotionally taxing film to conceive of from start to finish. If only to start, Granny Nanny is like an iconic woman figure in Jamaica. She's seen as like one of the most important female warriors like ever. She's not worldwide. So it's starting there and me not being able to dig up that much detail about where she comes from or what the stories of her about was difficult because I could see early on in the process before I really uncovered everything that a huge part of my island's history was just completely destroyed. So from the start, I knew I was kind of fighting an uphill battle with having very little archival footage or articles or history written down that I could just easily Google. So I had to ask my family, and the words have a difficult place in the hearts of a lot of Jamaicans because, as it was mentioned in the film, they're seen as traitors, similar to how some Jamaicans feel about Marcus Garvey. So it's a very charged conversation that I'm having with most of my family or any Jamaican historian that I can get my hands on. So I had to go talk to politicians in a foreign country that I was not born in, but that I am intrinsically tied to. And I had to justify my connection to this story over and over again, and I had to fight against my family who didn't want to document any of this, and deal with the tragedy of having a very incredible story covered up over and over again. And then I felt this very huge obligation to be one of the few primary sources speaking to Lord chiefs about their own history, being one of the few sources that people in the future will be able to look at for this exact story. So I kind of felt the scope of this was very intimidating for my first film, and as an undergrad student working on this mostly on my own. Yeah, but there's also a huge sense of relief seeing it today, on this screen, and knowing that at some point I get to put this in the hands of the wider public, that this could be something that people look at for years to come. So.
When I found all these letters, I began to have deeper conversations with my brother and sister. And my sister read a little, my brother hadn't read them. And my dad was still living before the dementia. And he knew about the letters, and I'm glad he didn't ask to read the letters. There were some derogatory things, his brother said about his dad, my grandfather. So this was deeply personal for me. When I started out writing this, it was a feature film. And then I realized I'd get 3/4 of the way through, and then I'd go back to the beginning, and it just kept happening and happening. And finally it occurred to me that no one's gonna really care about these things that you're talking about because you're trying to hide and whitewash the truth. So I realized that, it had to be truthful. Some of my family is here now. It's the first time they've seen it. I don't know if it'll be talking to me afterwards, but yeah, I mean, it was just a process, and a journey. And filming it was extremely emotional.
I want to thank you again, because the job, in this case, the job as a director and as an editor is to honor what she wrote, and also to bring alive the characters who embody her family members and those who impacted all that. So, hopefully I did my best to do that. I've watched this many times, having edited it. But today, sitting right there, I almost started crying. Not really sure why today I would be, knowing every single frame of the movie. But I think it has to do with the fact that we're all in this room, and intentionally, because of the Roxbury Film Festival, and because who we are, and intentionally being here to take a look at history and ourselves and try to figure out how to fix some of the problems we have today that still linger on. My mother was born in 1941, as I mentioned earlier, in northern Germany. Barely survived. Barely survived. Many people around her dead or taken away. Her father ended up in a concentration camp. And my father, a black man who was born in Georgia, his brother ended up going to war, coming back very messed up. And my father decided for himself, this was not the right place to be, and then I'm going to Germany where he met my mom. So a lot of similarities in some of the characters within the story. So throughout the whole process, thank you for making me cry a lot, Deb. Whatever she said. But I just really really enjoy the process of telling these types of stories, because we need to.
There are some of the actors are in the audience now, and I'd just like them to stand up, please. I didn't know my great-grandmother, but she had it down pat, she was very strong, but she was very weak when it came to her grandson, and, I just felt like I was there with her when she was acting. Thank you.
What's the question?
Just about finding all this information, actually creating the story, actually having those difficult conversations with your family, and then creating a film that all the world now can see and gets told.
Yeah, I'm just so taken by so many of your stories. I too was trained as a journalist, and having to make several films that are still in process with and about my family, they are by far the hardest people to interview in the world. Not just because I mostly know the stories, but because they just give you nothing sometimes. Or, there are things that they don't want to talk about and you try to take them there. I think what I learned most throughout this process is I stopped asking them things that they didn't want to share, and I asked them what they wanted to share. And that opened up a whole new, window of world of what the film could be versus, okay, we're gonna keep this secret and this is just for us, I learned a great deal of, I'm sorry, you asked that first question about why filmmaking. Through this film, I learned filmmaking from my grandfather. he didn't get a camera until, well, actually, no, he always had a camera. In the 70s, he has this beautiful footage, an 8mm that he took of my grandmother and my family, and I just found it, like, 50-some years later, got it developed, and he's like, I don't remember any of this, And when he got at camp for the first Christmas in like 1988, he's narrating every bit of footage, and so he's the best narrating. He tells us exactly where we are, what day, what time, who's around, and I didn't realize how much of that was ingrained in me when I started to, really develop the filmmaking language. And so, I also got to kind of endear myself to a new family, the Roberts family, who was in the film, the Tampa natives. I didn't meet them until pretty much the film was done. I worked with Miss Cynthia Wilson-Graham, the amazing historian that co-wrote the book, Remember in Paradise Park. And had the footage, and was like, okay, we're done. Just did a little cursory, like, let me just see if there was something else that I missed. Right, I didn't want to miss anything. And I found that Jay, the grandson, had uploaded his grandmother's 60mm footage on YouTube just for free. And I was like, oh my gosh. Once at Paradise Park, I have been, Cynthia had pretty much talked to everybody that was still alive that knew Paradise Park and was still there, and so I think Miss Roberts just turned 84, and she's like, come on down, like, let's talk. And so I went back down to Florida. I spent a few days with them and went back to Silver Springs with her for the first time since she had been back before it was just Paradise Park. So honestly, this was a healing film for me. The harder film is finishing right now, but I think it was just a joy. Honestly, I hear where everyone's coming from. I'm in that film right now, but this one was just for the joy of it, and happily, it happened that I also got to help with this archive and continue to build it and do the work that Cynthia's been doing for so long. So yeah, it was less hard, but more of just learning my voice as a filmmaker, and that was amazing.
Thank you all so much for your comments, for your films. I lied, and I'm not going to be able to give it out to the audience because we don't have time, because we have a film screening coming in after this, but they will be here for you to have if you have any questions for them.